London, 1817. The Earl of Ravenscroft was in possession of two immutable truths: that love was a fleeting delusion designed to separate fools from their sensibilities, and that the rain in London would invariably ruin his boots the moment they had been polished to perfection. Lord Preston Ravenscroft stood at the window of his Mayfair townhouse, watching droplets race down the glass while his valet fretted about the state of his master's cravat. The black armband he wore had become as much a part of his daily attire as his pocket watch, both serving as reminders of the passage of time and what it had stolen from him. "My lord," his valet, Morris, ventured cautiously, "perhaps a different style today?" "The mathematical has become rather expected." Preston waved a dismissive hand. "Expected is precisely what I desire, Morris. I have no wish to be remarkable in any capacity." "Yes, my lord." Morris sighed with the resignation of a man who remembered when his master had been the toast of London, rather than its most eligible recluse. "Shall I have the carriage brought round?" Lady Hartley's message indicated some urgency. "My sister's definition of urgency generally involves nothing more pressing than a lack of dance partners or the wrong shade of ribbon," Preston replied, though he reached for his hat nonetheless. Despite his complaints, he harbored a deep affection for his younger sister, Catherine. She had endured his 3 years of self-imposed social exile with admirable patience, understanding his withdrawal from society following Elizabeth's death. But lately, her patience had worn thin, and her attempts to draw him back into the world had grown more strategic. He suspected this summons was yet another plot to reintroduce him to some unsuspecting young lady deemed suitable by the matchmaking matrons of the ton. At 32, Preston was well aware that his status as a widowed earl with a considerable fortune made him prime matrimonial quarry, a fact that both annoyed and exhausted him. The carriage journey to his sister's Bloomsbury residence was mercifully brief. Lady Catherine Hartley received him in her drawing-room, her expression vacillating between sympathy and determination. "Preston, thank you for coming so promptly." She gestured to a chair. "Tea? Is there brandy in it?" When she pursed her lips, he sighed. "Then no, thank you. What catastrophe requires my immediate attention this time, Catherine? Has your husband finally realized that those watercolors you claim to admire so greatly cost more than a small country estate?" "Always so charming," she replied dryly. "I've called you here because I've received a most curious letter." Preston raised an eyebrow. "And this concerns me because it's about Thornfield." At the mention of his country estate, the one he had not visited since burying his wife there, Preston's expression hardened. "I fail to see how correspondence regarding my property would come to you rather than me." Catherine extended a folded letter. "It seems the writer was uncertain of your current address. Or perhaps—" She hesitated. "Perhaps they feared you would discard it unread if it came directly." With reluctance born of both suspicion and curiosity, Preston accepted the letter. The handwriting was neat, feminine, and unfamiliar. He read, "To the Earl of Ravenscroft, or to whom it may concern, I write with some trepidation, knowing the impropriety of my action, yet compelled by circumstance. My grandmother, Mrs. Eleanor Osborne, has fallen gravely ill. Her final wish is to see once more the gardens of Thornfield, where she served as head gardener's wife for 30 years until her retirement in 1802. I understand the estate has been closed these past years, but I implore your lordship's compassion. My grandmother speaks of the rose garden as if it were paradise itself, and I fear her remaining days are few. If permission could be granted for a brief visit, we would be eternally grateful. Your most humble servant. Miss Georgiana Osborne. Millfield Cottage, Thornfield Village. Preston refolded the letter with deliberate slowness. "Absolutely not. Preston, the estate is closed." Catherine leaned forward. "The estate is neglected. Mr. Wilson wrote just last month that the gardens are becoming overrun, the house requires maintenance, and the village suffers from your absence. I employ a steward precisely so I need not concern myself with such matters. A steward cannot replace the presence of the lord of the manor, and you know it." Catherine's voice softened. "It has been 3 years, Preston. Elizabeth would not want, do not," he interrupted, his voice dangerously quiet, "presume to tell me what my wife would want." The silence that followed was broken only by the ticking of the mantel clock and the distant sounds of London beyond the windows. "This Miss Osborne and her grandmother," Catherine finally said, "they're not asking for much. Just a day in the gardens." Preston stood, retrieving his hat. "The gardens where Elizabeth and I walk daily. The gardens where she told me she was with child. The gardens I pass through to bury them both." His voice remained steady, though his knuckles whitened around the brim of his hat. "Those gardens are not a public promenade for the entertainment of retired servants." "Preston, good day, Catherine." He departed, leaving his sister calling after him. In his carriage, he found the letter still clutched in his hand. He ought to tear it up, cast it out the window, and be done with it. Instead, against his better judgment, he read it again, his eyes lingering on the neat script. Miss Georgiana Osborne. The name itself conjured nothing, yet there was something in the tone of her letter, not presumptuous, not cloying, but earnest, that prevented him from destroying it outright. By the time the carriage returned him to his townhouse, Preston had convinced himself he would write a polite but firm refusal. 2 hours later, he discovered he had penned a different response entirely. Miss Osborne, your letter regarding Thornfield has been received. While the estate remains closed, an exception shall be made in consideration of your grandmother's service and condition. Mr. Wilson, the steward, will be instructed to admit you to the gardens for one afternoon, at a date of your choosing this month. Please correspond directly with him to arrange the details. Ravenscroft. He sealed it before he could reconsider, telling himself it was merely the expedient solution. Allow the visit, supervised by Wilson, and be done with the matter. There was no need for his involvement, no reason for him to travel to Thornfield himself. 3 days later, Preston found himself inexplicably ordering his travelling carriage prepared for the journey to Derbyshire. "We're going to Thornfield, my lord?" Morris asked, clearly startled as he packed Preston's valise. "I am going to Thornfield," Preston corrected. "You will remain in London." "I anticipate a brief stay, a matter of business only." Morris, who had served the Earl for 12 years and knew him better than most, merely nodded, though his expression spoke volumes. The journey northward provided ample time for Preston to contemplate the folly of his decision. What business did he truly have at Thornfield that couldn't be handled by correspondence? None. Yet something about the prospect of strangers wandering the grounds, evaluating the state of his retreat, compelled him to see it for himself first. Thornfield Manor came into view as the carriage rounded the last bend in the drive, a handsome stone edifice with Tudor origins and Georgian improvements. Preston's chest tightened at the sight. The ivy had grown unchecked up the eastern wall, and even from a distance, he could see that Catherine was correct about the gardens. What had once been meticulously maintained parterres now showed signs of nature's steady reclamation. Mr. Wilson emerged from the estate office, clearly astonished to see his employer. "My lord, we had no word of your arrival." "I would have prepared the house. That won't be necessary, Wilson. I've come only to inspect the property and will stay but a night or two." The steward's face betrayed both relief and concern. "Of course, my lord. The housekeeper has maintained your chambers in expectation of, that is, should you ever wish to return." Preston ignored the implication. "I received a letter regarding a Miss Osborne and her grandmother wishing to visit the gardens. Have they made arrangements with you?" "Yes, my lord. They're expected tomorrow afternoon." Something close to panic fluttered in Preston's chest, though he maintained his impassive expression. "I see. Well, I shall be gone by then. I have no desire to play host." "As you wish, my lord. Though if I might mention, old Mrs. Osborne was much beloved in the village. Her husband designed the rose garden that the late Countess so admired." At the mention of Elizabeth, Preston cut the conversation short. "I'll take a brief walk before dinner, Wilson. Have a cold collation prepared in the library rather than the dining room." Alone, Preston found himself drawn inexorably toward the gardens. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the lawns as he followed the gravel paths that wound between boxwood hedges and overgrown flower beds. Despite 3 years of relative neglect, there remained a ghostly echo of the garden's former glory. And there, at the heart of it all, stood the rose garden, still surprisingly well-maintained compared to its surroundings. The late summer blooms offered a riot of color and fragrance. Preston stopped short, his breath catching. Elizabeth had loved this place above all others. She had spent hours here, planning improvements, selecting new varieties, instructing the gardeners. In the center stood a small stone bench where she had sat the day she told him they would have a child. The memory hit him with unexpected force. He had spent 3 years avoiding such recollections, keeping the grief at bay through rigid routine and isolation. Now, standing among her roses, he found himself ambushed by both sorrow and a strange, unwelcome sense of homecoming. A voice startled him from his reverie. "Begging your pardon, sir, but the garden is closed to visitors." Preston turned to find a young woman regarding him with polite determination. She wore a simple muslin dress of pale blue, a straw bonnet shielding her face from the sun. Her posture suggested she was prepared to evict him bodily if necessary, despite her slight frame. "Closed to visitors," he repeated, momentarily too taken aback to identify himself. "Yes, sir. By order of the Earl." Her chin lifted slightly. "I understand the gardens will open to us tomorrow, but until then." The absurdity of being ordered off his own property by this slip of a woman almost provoked a smile, something he could not recall experiencing in recent memory. "You must be Miss Osborne," he said. She blinked, clearly surprised. "I am. How did you?" "I am acquainted with your letter to Lord Ravenscroft." Understanding dawned in her expression. "Oh. You must be Mr. Wilson, the steward. I'm terribly sorry for the confusion. We arrived in the village earlier than anticipated, and grandmother was so eager." She glanced behind her, and Preston noticed for the first time an elderly woman seated on a garden bench some distance away. He should correct her misapprehension. He should identify himself properly. Instead, he heard himself say, "You're a day early." Miss Osborne's cheeks colored. "Yes, and I apologize for the presumption. When we passed the gate and found it unlocked, grandmother was so insistent. She's not been well, you see, and her spirits lifted so dramatically at just the sight of Thornfield." Preston observed the older woman on the bench. Even from a distance, he could see her frail form, wrapped in shawls despite the mild weather. "How did you come to be in the rose garden?" he asked, more curious than accusatory. "It lies quite a distance from the main entrance." "Grandmother remembered the paths perfectly," Miss Osborne replied, a note of pride in her voice. "She walked them daily for 30 years, after all. Though I confess the journey has tired her." Preston found himself at an unexpected crossroads. The proper course would be to reveal his identity and politely but firmly escort them from the property until their appointed time. Yet something in the young woman's direct gaze, not pleading, but dignified even in her transgression, gave him pause. "Since you're already here," he said finally, "you may remain for a short while. I trust you'll disturb nothing." Relief softened her features. "Thank you, Mr. Wilson. We shall be most careful." As she turned to rejoin her grandmother, Preston impulsively asked, "What makes these gardens so important to Mrs. Osborne?" Miss Osborne looked back, seeming to consider her answer carefully. "They were her world for much of her life. My grandfather poured his heart into designing them, and after his death, she continued tending them until age forced her retirement." A wistful smile touched her lips. "She says flowers remember those who loved them, even when people forget." With a small curtsy, she left him standing amidst the roses, her words echoing uncomfortably in his mind. Rather than return to the house, Preston circled around the hedgerow, approaching from an angle that allowed him to observe the two women without being immediately noticed. Mrs. Osborne was speaking softly, her weathered hand reaching out to touch a nearby bloom. Her granddaughter listened attentively, occasionally nodding or asking a question. There was something in their quiet communion that struck Preston as deeply private, yet he could not bring himself to leave. The Duchess of Portland there, see how she's taken over that corner, the old woman was saying. James always said she was ambitious. And there, that's the York and Lancaster. The late Earl's mother planted that one when the current Earl was born, said a child who united two great families deserved a rose that did the same. Preston stilled. He had never heard that story. His mother had died when he was young, and his father had rarely spoken of her. And that white one? Miss Osborne asked. Ah, that's Madame Hardy. The Countess planted those herself, the last summer she was with us. Mrs. Osborne's voice softened. Such a kind lady. Always had a word for everyone, never too grand to get her hands in the soil. The Earl adored her. Preston felt his throat constrict. What happened to her? Miss Osborne asked. Childbed fever, they said. Lost both her and the babe. A terrible business. They say the Earl hasn't set foot in Thornfield since the funeral. Mrs. Osborne shook her head slowly. The Gardens miss her. Places no, my dear. They remember joy and sorrow both. Preston retreated silently, unwilling to hear more. He returned to the house, instructing Wilson to ensure the women were offered refreshment before they departed, but to make no mention of his presence at Thornfield. That night, alone in the library that still held Elizabeth's collection of botanical books, Preston penned a letter, Miss Osborne, I trust your grandmother found some pleasure in her visit to the gardens today. Please inform her that her comments regarding the history of the roses were most illuminating. You have my permission to return tomorrow as planned, and indeed on any day this month that suits Mrs. Osborne's health and comfort. I would ask that you send word, by way of Mr. Wilson, of which days you intend to visit. Ravenscroft. He sealed it and left instructions for its delivery, telling himself that his only motivation was courtesy to an elderly former servant. If he also instructed the head gardener to begin restoring the grounds to their former glory, that was merely proper estate management. Preston had intended to depart Thornfield before Miss Osborne and her grandmother returned the following day. Yet morning found him still in residence, reviewing estate accounts in the library with a focus he had not felt in years. When Wilson discreetly mentioned the Osbornes had arrived, Preston merely nodded and continued his work. Only when he glanced out the window to see Miss Osborne assisting her grandmother along the path did he set aside his papers. Acting on impulse, he made his way to the kitchens, where he instructed the cook to prepare a basket. A picnic, my lord? The woman asked, unable to conceal her surprise. A simple refreshment for our visitors in the garden, Preston corrected. Nothing elaborate. Tea, some of those little cakes you used to make. He trailed off, suddenly aware of the cook's startled expression. Is something amiss? No, my lord. It's just, the lemon cakes were the late Countess's favorite. Preston had not consciously remembered that detail. Are they? Well, include them all the same. When the basket was prepared, he carried it himself rather than summoning a servant, ignoring the curious glances that followed him. He located the Osbornes in the Knott garden, where Mrs. Osborne was regaling her granddaughter with tales of grand garden parties past. The orchestra would set up there, she was saying, pointing with a trembling hand, and the ladies in their fine dresses would promenade along these paths. Lord Ravenscroft's mother was particular about the musicians, would have none but the best. Preston cleared his throat, and both women turned. Miss Osborne rose quickly, her expression shifting from surprise to confusion as she recognized him from the previous day. Mr. Wilson, how kind of you to visit us again. I've brought some refreshments, he said, raising the basket slightly. I thought perhaps Mrs. Osborne might like to rest and take some tea. The older woman squinted at him. You're not Wilson, she declared with the forthright confidence of the elderly. Wilson's a stoop fellow with whiskers. You're too grand by half. Miss Osborne looked mortified. Grandmother! Preston surprised himself by laughing, the short, rusty sound, but genuine. Your grandmother is quite right, Miss Osborne. I am not Mr. Wilson. He bowed slightly. Preston Ravenscroft, at your service. The colour drained from Miss Osborne's face. My lord. We had no idea. Yesterday, in the garden, she sank into a hasty curtsy. Please accept our most profound apologies for the misunderstanding. No apology necessary, Preston said, setting the basket on the bench beside Mrs. Osborne. I allowed the misapprehension to continue, which was unconscionable of me. Mrs. Osborne was studying him with keen eyes that belied her frail appearance. I remember you as a boy, my lord. Used to climb the oak by the west wing and drive your mother to distraction. Preston was startled by the memory. I'd forgotten about that tree. It's still there, she replied. Grew back stronger after that lightning strike in '93. I'd like to see it, he found himself saying. Perhaps after tea. And so began one of the strangest afternoons of Preston's life. While Mrs. Osborne held court on the garden bench, her granddaughter and the Earl of Ravenscroft served her tea and cakes, listening as she recounted the history of Thornfield's gardens with the clarity of true passion. Miss Osborne, recovering from her initial embarrassment, proved to be a gracious and intelligent companion. She asked thoughtful questions about the estate and shared amusing anecdotes of village life that occasionally coaxed another rusty laugh from Preston. My grandmother, she explained as they walked slightly ahead while Mrs. Osborne rested, has been the unofficial historian of Thornfield Village for decades. There isn't a family for miles whose marriages, births, and scandals she can't recite from memory. A valuable skill, Preston observed. Though perhaps an occasionally dangerous one. Miss Osborne's eye sparkled with humour. Indeed. She's been barred from more than one tea party after innocent observations about certain gentlemen's unexpected resemblances to neighbouring landowners rather than their purported fathers. For the first time in 3 years, Preston felt the weight of grief lift slightly. There was something refreshingly direct about Georgiana Osborne, a lack of artifice that made her company restful rather than demanding. When it came time for the Osbornes to depart, Preston found himself reluctant to see them go. You will return tomorrow, he asked as he assisted Mrs. Osborne into the modest gig that had brought them from the village. It was Miss Osborne who answered, her expression carefully composed. We wouldn't wish to impose further on your lordship's hospitality. It would be no imposition, he replied, surprising himself with his sincerity. I believe your grandmother has more garden history to impart, and I find I am eager to learn it. Mrs. Osborne patted his hand. The East Garden tomorrow, I think. That's where the Countess designed her butterfly border. Preston felt the familiar pang at Elizabeth's mention, but it was tempered now with something else, a strange curiosity about this aspect of his late wife he had never fully appreciated. Until tomorrow, then, he said, stepping back as Miss Osborne took up the reins. As they drove away, Preston caught the questioning glance Georgiana cast back toward him, her expression a complex mixture of concern and interest that lingered in his thoughts as he returned to the manor house. The following day brought the Osbornes back to Thornfield, and the next, and the next. Each visit established a pattern: garden walks, shared meals, and conversations that ranged from estate matters to literature to village gossip. Preston found himself looking forward to these interludes with an eagerness that both puzzled and alarmed him. On their 5th visit, rain threatened to cut the day short. Without hesitation, Preston invited them inside the manor house, the first guests he had entertained there since Elizabeth's death. As Mrs. Osborne exclaimed over the conservatory, Georgiana lingered in the portrait gallery, studying the paintings of Ravenscroft ancestors with evident interest. My late wife's edition, Preston said, coming to stand beside her. She felt it important to keep the old lords in line, as she put it. Georgiana turned to him, her expression gentle. She sounds as though she had a lively spirit. She did. The words came easier than he expected. Elizabeth filled Thornfield with life. After she was gone, I couldn't bear to remain among the echoes. Yet here you are, Georgiana observed softly. Preston considered this. Yes. Here I am. They stood in companionable silence before he added, your letter arrived at a moment when I was not receptive to revisiting the past. I nearly refused your request. I'm grateful you didn't, she replied. Grandmother has found such joy in these visits. As have I, she added, with a directness that was becoming familiar to him. That evening, After the Osbornes had departed, Preston found himself wandering the halls of Thornfield with new eyes. The pain of memory remained, but alongside it grew something else, a recognition that Elizabeth's presence in these rooms was not merely a reminder of loss, but a testament to the life they had shared. For the first time, he entered the nursery that had been prepared but never used. The tiny garments, the painted carousel, the rocking horse, all preserved as if awaiting an arrival that would never come. Preston stood in the center of the room, allowing the grief to wash through him rather than fighting against it. When Wilson found him there an hour later, the Earl was calmly making notes about renovations to update the room for future use. "My lord," the steward ventured cautiously. "It occurs to me, Wilson, that a house should be lived in," Preston replied. "Gather the staff tomorrow. We have much to discuss about Thornfield's future." The next morning brought a letter from Georgiana, my Lord Ravenscroft, I write with mixed emotions to inform you that grandmother took a turn for the worse last night. The physician has advised against any exertion, and I fear our visits to Thornfield must be postponed. She speaks of your kindness with great appreciation and hopes to continue our garden explorations when her strength returns. With sincere gratitude for your hospitality. Georgiana Osborne. Preston read the letter twice before summoning his carriage. Within the hour, he was at Millfield Cottage, a modest but well-kept home on the edge of Thornfield village. The maid who answered his knock seemed overwhelmed by the presence of the Earl on her doorstep. Before she could announce him, Preston heard Georgiana's voice from within. "Who is it, Mary?" "If it's Dr. Patterson, send him up immediately." "It's not the doctor, miss," the flustered maid replied. "It's the Earl himself." Georgiana appeared in the hallway, her hair simply dressed, her face pale with concern. "Lord Ravenscroft. This is unexpected. I received your letter and wished to inquire after Mrs. Osborne personally," he said, suddenly aware of the impropriety of his impulsive visit. "I've also brought some hothouse peaches from Thornfield. I recall your grandmother mentioning they were her favorite." The surprise in Georgiana's expression softened to gratitude. "That's incredibly thoughtful. Please, come in. Grandmother is resting, but I know she'll be cheered by your visit." The cottage was as he expected, modest but comfortable, filled with books and mementos of a life well lived. Georgiana led him to a small sitting room, apologizing unnecessarily for its simplicity. "I find I prefer simplicity these days," Preston replied, taking the seat she offered. "How serious is your grandmother's condition?" Georgiana's composure wavered slightly. "Dr. Patterson says it's her heart. She may recover from this episode with rest, but—" She left the sentence unfinished. "Is there anything you need?" "Anything I can provide?" "You've done more than enough already," she assured him. "These past days at Thornfield have brought her such happiness. I believe they've given her strength she might otherwise not have found." Preston leaned forward. "They've given me something as well." "My lord?" "A reason to return to Thornfield. A reminder that life continues, even after great loss." He hesitated, unaccustomed to such personal revelations. "Your grandmother speaks of gardens remembering those who loved them. I think perhaps houses do as well." Georgiana's eyes searched his face. "And does Thornfield remember happily?" "It begins to," he said softly. "With help." The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken understanding. Finally, Georgiana rose. "Would you like to see grandmother?" "She's awake, though the doctor advised against much conversation." Mrs. Osborne was propped up in bed, looking smaller and more fragile than Preston remembered, but her eyes brightened at his entrance. "Well now," she said, her voice thin but determined, "if it isn't the Earl himself come to visit old Eleanor Osborne. What would your grandfather say?" "That I should have come sooner," Preston replied, taking the seat beside her bed. "And that I should listen carefully to everything you have to tell me about his gardens." The old woman smiled. "Smart man, your grandfather." Her gaze shifted to the window, through which the spires of Thornfield were just visible in the distance. "The snowdrops will be coming in February. Along the south wall, thousands of them. The late Countess planted those bulbs herself. I'll make sure they're properly tended, Preston promised. See that you do. Mrs. Osborne's eyes drifted closed briefly before she roused herself. And see to my Georgiana too. She pretends she's content with village life and caring for a cantankerous old woman, but she deserves more. Grandmother! Georgiana protested, her cheeks colouring. Hush, child. I'm old and ill, I'll speak my mind as I please. She fixed Preston with a surprisingly stern look. She reads Latin, you know. And Greek. Taught herself from the vicar's books. Cleverer than most men I've known, including you, my lord, begging your pardon. Preston found himself smiling. No offence taken, Mrs. Osborne. I've observed Miss Osborne's intelligence for myself. Good. Then you won't mind if she continues using your library. The village lending library is woefully inadequate for her appetites. The Thornfield Library is at Miss Osborne's disposal whenever she wishes, Preston replied, casting a glance at Georgiana, who appeared mortified by her grandmother's matchmaking. After assuring Mrs. Osborne he would return the following day, Preston took his leave. Georgiana accompanied him to the door, her composure restored but a lingering embarrassment in her eyes. I must apologize for my grandmother's presumption, my lord. Age and illness have removed what few filters she once possessed. There's no need for apology. I admire her directness. He hesitated, then added, and I meant what I said about the library. Thornfield has one of the finest collections in the county, and it sees far too little use these days. The gratitude in her smile stirred something long dormant in Preston's chest. Over the following weeks, as autumn deepened toward winter, a routine developed. Preston divided his time between estate business and visits to Millfield Cottage, where Mrs. Osborne's health fluctuated but her spirit remained undimmed. Meanwhile, Georgiana became a regular presence at Thornfield's library, initially coming only when Preston was engaged elsewhere, but gradually staying for afternoon tea and conversations that stretched into the evening. London society would have been scandalized by the Earl's attentions to a village spinster of no particular fortune or connections. Preston found that he cared not at all for what society might think. One crisp November afternoon, he discovered Georgiana in Elizabeth's reading room, absorbed in a volume of poetry. Wordsworth, he asked, recognizing the binding. She looked up with a smile that had become precious to him. Byron, actually. Your late Countess had eclectic tastes. As do you. He took a seat opposite her. Mrs. Wilson tells me you've been assisting the village school with their lessons. Georgiana marked her place in the book. Only twice a week. The children are eager learners, but Mr. Jessup is overwhelmed with 40 pupils of varying ages and abilities. You enjoy teaching? Very much. Though my opportunities have been limited to the village children and a few young ladies whose parents wished them to acquire basic accomplishments without the expense of a proper governess. Preston studied her thoughtful expression. You might have made a fine governess yourself. Or a headmistress, even. Perhaps in another life. Her smile turned wistful. But grandmother needed me, and I could never regret the years with her. And now? Georgiana met his gaze directly, a quality he had come to deeply appreciate. Now I find myself at a crossroads, with possibilities I had not anticipated. The air between them seemed charged with unspoken meaning. Preston leaned forward, about to speak, when Wilson appeared at the door. Forgive the interruption, my lord, but a messenger has arrived from Millfield Cottage. Mrs. Osborne has taken a severe turn, and Miss Osborne is requested to return immediately. The peaceful afternoon shattered. Georgiana was on her feet instantly, her face pale but composed. Preston called for his carriage and insisted on accompanying her. They found Mrs. Osborne conscious but weakened, the doctor at her bedside wearing the grave expression medical men reserve for situations beyond their control. Ah, there you are, my dears, the old woman said, her voice barely above a whisper. Come closer. My eyes aren't what they were. Georgiana knelt beside the bed, taking her grandmother's hand. Preston stood behind her, a silent pillar of support. Now listen to me, Mrs. Osborne said, her frail voice surprisingly commanding. I've had 87 good years on this earth. I've loved and been loved. I've seen the seasons turn more times than most. There's nothing tragic in my passing when it comes. Grandmother, please, Georgiana began, her voice breaking. Hush, child. Let an old woman have her say. Mrs. Osborne's gaze shifted to Preston. You'll look after her? The question contained multitudes. Preston answered without hesitation. With everything I am, if she'll allow it. Mrs. Osborne nodded, satisfied. Good. She'll need time. She has a stubborn streak, gets that from me. A ghost of her familiar humor crossed her face. And you, my lord, need someone to remind you that gardens grow again after winter. Even the ones we think are lost forever. Through the long night that followed, Preston remained at Thornfield, sending hourly messengers to Millfield Cottage for updates. Near dawn, word came that Eleanor Osborne had passed peacefully in her sleep, with Georgiana at her side. The funeral was held 3 days later in the village churchyard. Preston stood beside Georgiana as her grandmother was laid to rest, conscious of the curious glances from villagers who noted their lord's presence at a servant's burial. When Georgiana remained dry-eyed and straight-backed throughout the service, he recognized the effort of will it cost her. Only when the last mourners had departed did she allow her composure to crack. Preston led her to a stone bench beneath a yew tree, offering his handkerchief without comment. I've been preparing for this moment for years, she said finally. Yet I find I'm not prepared at all. One never is, he replied quietly. No matter how expected the loss. She studied his face. Does it become easier? The absence. Preston considered the question with the honesty she deserved. Not easier. Different. Less raw, perhaps. The memories become less painful to touch. But the absence remains. They sat in companionable silence until Georgiana spoke again. I must decide what comes next. The cottage was provided for grandmother as part of her pension from Thornfield. I have some savings, but the cottage is yours for as long as you wish it, Preston interrupted. And there is another matter I've been meaning to discuss with you. She looked at him questioningly. Thornfield is in need of a librarian, he said. The collection has been neglected these past years and requires proper cataloguing and care. It would include a stipend, of course, and... Are you offering me charity, my lord? Georgiana asked, her voice gentle but direct. I'm offering you a position for which you are uniquely qualified, he corrected. Though I confess my motivations are not entirely professional. A faint blush colored her cheeks. Lord Ravenscroft, Preston, he said. Please. Preston. His name on her lips sent a warmth through him that had nothing to do with the weak winter sun. I'm sensible of the honor you do me, but I fear accepting such a position might lead to misunderstandings. The only misunderstanding would be if you believed I offered it solely as a means to keep you near, he replied. Though I cannot deny that would be a most welcome consequence. Georgiana's eyes widened slightly. You should know that I have no expectations. Our friendship has been a comfort during this difficult time, but I harbor no illusions about, what if I wish you to harbor illusions? Preston interrupted, surprising himself with his forwardness. Or rather, not illusions, but hopes. Possibilities. The color in Georgiana's cheeks deepened. You speak in riddles, my lord. Preston, he corrected again, taking her gloved hand in his. And yes, I find myself uncharacteristically indirect. Let me speak plainly, your grandmother saw what I was only beginning to recognize, that you have brought life back to Thornfield. And to me. Georgiana's breath caught. Preston, you needn't, I swore never to love again, he continued, the words flowing now with unstoppable momentum. I believed that path was closed to me forever. But these past weeks have shown me how wrong I was. He squeezed her hand gently. I am not offering you employment, Georgiana. Or not only employment. I am offering you my heart, if you find it worth accepting. Tears glistened in her eyes, but a smile bloomed across her face. "A heart so loyal and true is beyond price," she whispered. "But are you certain?" "The world will say you married beneath your station." "The world may say what it pleases," Preston replied. "I have spent 3 years caring for the world's opinion and denying my own happiness. I will not make that mistake again." He hesitated, suddenly uncertain. "Unless, of course, your own feelings are otherwise engaged." Georgiana laughed softly, a sound that resonated in Preston's chest like music long forgotten. "My feelings have been engaged since you appeared in the rose garden with tea and lemon cakes, pretending to be Mr. Wilson." "Is that a yes?" "It's a yes," she confirmed, her eyes shining. "Though I believe proper custom dictates a more formal proposal." Preston stood, drawing her to her feet, then dropped to one knee before her, heedless of the damp churchyard ground. "Miss Georgiana Osborne, would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife? I can promise you books and gardens and conversation, though I cannot guarantee I won't occasionally retreat into brooding silence." "In that case, how could I refuse?" she replied, her smile luminous even through her tears. "Yes, Lord Preston Ravenscroft. I will marry you, brooding silences and all." As Preston rose and drew her into his embrace, a ray of winter sunlight broke through the clouds, illuminating the yew tree above them. He thought of Eleanor Osborne's words about gardens remembering those who loved them and wondered if perhaps she was offering her blessing from beyond. Spring came early to Thornfield that year. The snowdrops Elizabeth had planted bloomed in magnificent profusion along the south wall, while in the rose garden, new varieties were being cultivated under the direction of the new Countess of Ravenscroft. The library, too, had undergone a transformation, with Georgiana's systematic approach bringing order to what had been benign neglect. Preston often found her there, surrounded by books and correspondence, as likely to be drafting plans for the village school she had established as managing the estate's substantial literary collection. On a particularly fine April morning, Preston entered the library to find his wife absorbed in a letter, her brow furrowed in concentration. "Troubling news?" he asked, coming to stand behind her chair. "From your sister," Georgiana replied, tilting her head to receive his kiss. "She expresses astonishment that we are not planning to join the season in London this year." Preston laughed, a sound that now came easily to him. "Catherine will survive the disappointment. Though perhaps we might visit in June, after the worst of the crush has passed." Georgiana set the letter aside. "Speaking of Catherine, she sent a package as well. A belated wedding gift, she calls it." She indicated a small parcel on the desk. Preston unwrapped it to find a leather-bound journal. Opening it, he recognized Elizabeth's handwriting, her garden diary, filled with plans and observations, sketches, and pressed flowers. "Catherine found it among her things," Georgiana explained softly. "Elizabeth had sent it to her for safekeeping before. Preston ran his fingers over the familiar script, waiting for the pain that had always accompanied such reminders. Instead, he felt a gentle melancholy tempered by genuine gratitude. "We'll implement her butterfly garden this summer," he said, looking up to meet his wife's understanding gaze. "The one she designed for the East Terrace." Georgiana nodded, rising to stand beside him. "I think she would be pleased to know Thornfield blooms again." She took his hand, placing it gently against her still flat stomach. "In more ways than one." Preston froze, his eyes widening as he understood her meaning. "Georgiana? Are you certain?" "Dr. Patterson confirmed it yesterday," she replied, her eyes shining with a mixture of joy and trepidation. "I know it may bring difficult memories." He silenced her with a kiss, pouring into it all the complex emotions her news evoked: hope, fear, gratitude, and above all, love. "Life continues," he said when they parted, echoing the words he had spoken to her months ago in Millfield Cottage. "Even after great loss." Georgiana leaned her head against his shoulder. "Your grandmother was right about the snowdrops." "My grandmother?" "Mrs. Osborne told me once that your grandmother claimed snowdrops were promises, winter's assurance that spring would always return, no matter how long or dark the cold." Preston gazed out the library window toward the gardens where those very flowers were finishing their brief but essential season, making way for the daffodils and tulips that would follow. A simple letter, he mused, requesting a visit to the gardens. Who could have imagined where it would lead? I suspect grandmother had an inkling, Georgiana replied with a smile. She was rather strategic for someone who claimed to be merely sentimental. Preston laughed, drawing his wife closer. Then I am forever in her debt, he said, for the letter that changed everything.